All right, welcome. Today, we're going to dive into something really fascinating. How one super simple ratio completely changed the game for brain radiosurgery. Seriously. It's a story about a hidden danger that, believe it or not, was hiding in plain sight for years. So let's just start with the big question, right? How in the world do you destroy a brain tumor without destroying the healthy brain tissue around it? I mean, think about it. You're using these super focused beams of radiation, and your margin for error? It's basically zero. We're talking about a battlefield where literally every single millimeter is the difference between success and disaster. So yeah, that's the core dilemma of radiosurgery. And it has always been this incredibly delicate balancing act. You have to deliver a lethal dose of radiation right into the tumor. But at the same time, you have to deliver next to nothing to the healthy, supercritical tissue that's just right there. The stakes just couldn't be any higher. Okay, so for years and years, the go-to tool for judging if a treatment plan was any good was something called the Conformity Index. And it's a really simple idea. It just asks one basic question. How well does the shape of our radiation dose, the blast zone, match the actual shape of the tumor? And this is the perfect way to think about it. It's like judging a painter only on whether they stayed inside the lines. Now, don't get me wrong, staying inside the lines is super important, right? Absolutely crucial. But it doesn't tell you the whole story. And that's the problem. The conformity index was missing a huge and frankly dangerous piece of the puzzle. Which brings us to the real heart of the issue here. See, the danger wasn't just about getting the shape right. It was about all that radiation that spills outside the main target. Physicists have a term for this, lower isodoses. But you can just think of it as a wider, less intense halo of radiation surrounding the tumor. And that spillover, well, the conformity index was completely blind to it. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. Conformity? That's all about matching the tumor's shape. But the gradient? That's a whole different question. It's about how quickly that radiation dose falls off once you leave the tumor. So do you have a really steep, safe cliff where the dose just plummets to zero? Or do you have a gentle, dangerous hill that slopes down slowly, bathing all that healthy brain tissue in unwanted radiation? And this was the exact dilemma facing physicists. They could create two treatment plans with the exact same conformity score, but they knew just from looking at them and from their experience that one was way riskier than the other. They could see the problem with their own eyes, but they had no simple metric, no number to actually prove or quantify it. So yeah, they needed a new tool, badly. And then in 2006, the solution arrived. Two researchers, Ian Paddock and Bodo Lipitz, published a paper in the Journal of Neurosurgery. And they propose this just elegantly simple idea. And here it is, the gradient index, or GI. Now I know, the definition looks a little technical, but let's just break it down. It's actually really simple. An isodose is basically just a 3D bubble of tissue that's getting a certain amount of radiation. So all this index does is it compares the size of the bubble getting half the main dose to the size of the bubble getting the full main dose. That's it. It's just a simple ratio that tells you how much radiation is spilling outside the target. And if you remember only one thing from this whole explainer, make it this. Lower is better. A lower GI number means less spillover. It means you got that steep, safe cliff we talked about. It means a safer treatment plan. It is really that simple. Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. When the authors took this new gradient index and started applying it to actual real-world treatment plans, the results were, frankly, stunning. They uncovered some truths that were completely counterintuitive and challenged decades of what everyone just assumed was best practice. Okay, check this out. This table is basically the key finding of the whole paper. You're looking at 3 different treatment plans for the very same tumor. Now, look at the conformity index. They're identical. 0.87, 0.87, 0.87. So by the old standard, these plans are all equally good. But now, look at the gradient index. Whoa! Suddenly we see the truth. Plan 3, with a GI of 2.65, is way, way safer than Plan 1, which has a GI of 3.30. It's not even close. And this, right here, was a total bombshell for the field. It basically proved that the common wisdom at the time, which was to use lots of tiny radiation beams, what they call isocenters, all focused on the tumor, wasn't always the best or safest way to do it. The data was showing the exact opposite of what a lot of people believed was a fundamental rule of treatment planning. And it gets even crazier. The paper showed that the sweet spot for creating that super steep, safe dose falloff wasn't the traditional 50% level that everyone was using. Nope. On average, the optimal point was actually closer to 40%. And you got to understand, this wasn't just some minor adjustment. This was a fundamental shift in how you design a treatment plan to make it as safe as possible for the patient. And get this, here's another shocker from the study. They found a strong correlation that showed that using more radiation sources, more of those isosenders, often made the gradient index worse. It just seemed completely backwards, but the numbers didn't lie. Sometimes a simpler plan was actually a safer plan. All right, so let's put this all together. We've seen the data, we've seen the surprises. But what does this little ratio really mean in the real world? What does it mean for the safety of every single patient who has to go through this? Well, for starters, the gradient index created a universal language for safety. For the first time, doctors could objectively look at two different plans and say, okay, this one is quantifiably safer. This one has less collateral damage. It gave them a way to measure and minimize that penumbra dose. That's just the fuzzy low-dose edge of the radiation beam. And what's really powerful is that you can use it to compare totally different technologies, like Gamma Knife versus CyberKnife. At the end of the day, it's a tool that helps them slash the dose to the healthy brain, and that means a lower risk of complications. It's a huge deal. And that really brings us to the final takeaway here. In a world full of incredibly complex, multi-million-dollar medical machines, isn't it amazing that one of the biggest leaps forward in patient safety came not from a new piece of hardware, but from a simple, elegant, powerful idea? Just a simple ratio. A ratio that helps doctors make sure they're not just destroying a tumor, but protecting a human being.